Chapter 17 Complications. "You will not get away with this, you ruffian!" Prince Facade called out. The last thing he remembered was his fight with the green-suited thief getting interrupted by some kind of living statue, and then it had all gone dark before the prince awoke in his current state. That state was having been disarmed, his magical artifacts removed, and his ankles bound with rope so that he could only take short, quick steps while following his own horse, that his bound wrists were tethered to it by more of the same rope. His armor was now the color of gray steel since his magical ring had been taken, and as for the thief, as he was certain that was what this ruffian truly was, he was riding on Facade's horse as they made their way around the rocky ocean coast. "Mark my words, you will be punished for this," the prince continued. "I promise you that you will rue the day that you crossed—" His words became a startled outcry as the thief spurred the horse, causing it to pick up speed and making Facade lose his balance. The still pouring rain had turned the coast into a giant mud puddle, and now the prince was being dragged through it, until the thief made the horse stop after a short distance. If there was anything that Facade hated, it was getting dirty, and with the exception of today, he had usually managed to complete all of his quests without experiencing the unpleasantness of a mouthful of mud. "Sorry, were you saying something?" the thief asked as the prince got up. "Do something, Perfection!" Facade yelled to the horse. "Throw him, or roll on him, or something!" In response, the horse just snorted and kind of shook its head before resuming the walk, causing the prince to nearly lose his balance again as he struggled to keep moving. He was only glad that Zelda was not there to see him in such a state, defeated and bound to his own horse by a common thief who humiliated him at every turn. Obviously, brute force was no longer going to work in this situation, so he needed to use his mind. Now he suspected that this thief might not be Gargamel's man after all, since he would have probably just killed him after knocking him out if he was. But then how did he come upon that chest? Had he discovered it by accident while looting historical places? And where was he taking him? A sort of thieves' den? "Do you even know what is inside that chest?" Facade asked. "It must have been difficult to retrieve, but if you let me go, I will pay you handsomely for it, as well as a small ransom for my own freedom. That is your plan, is it not? Selling the chest and then ransoming me back to my family?" "And I thought Aghanim talked too much," the thief replied with an aggravated sigh. "Look, friend, I don't know who you are or how you know about the chests, but I do know that you attacked me like a lunatic without reason. Something tells me that you aren't one of Ganondorf's minions, and I'm not a murderer, so I'm taking you to Impa, then she can decide what to do with you." The prince fell silent after hearing those words, and now a glimmer of hope was shining through his dark situation. Of course, how had he not seen it before? During their fight, he had noticed that the thief carried the sword and shield of a knight of Hyrule, but he had assumed that it had been stolen. This carried the possibility that he was no thief at all, and that maybe Facade had found an ally. "I see now that I have made a grave mistake," the prince continued. "When I saw your disguise, I thought you a common forest bandit, but if you know Impa, then you must serve the royal family. Don't you see we are on the same side? I am Facade, Prince of Arcadia, Zelda's betrothed." "Yes, of course you are," the thief replied while rolling his eyes. "And I am Harkinian, King of Hyrule. Now shut your mouth before I spur the horse again and drag you the rest of the way." Meanwhile, near the foot of Death Mountain, there had been nothing that Aghanim could do to stop himself from falling over the edge of the waterfall, and there was pain when he felt the rocks on the bottom of the river below scrape against his back, but at least it helped him to get away from Ganondorf. The momentum of the fall had driven him back to the surface, but with only one working arm, it was difficult for the robed wizard to stay afloat, while the fast-moving current of the river carried him off. The good news was that there had been no sign of the sorcerer or any more attacks made by him from a distance after the escape, but the bad news was that Aghanim was hurt. His arm was broken, his back had been sliced from the rocks, and the pain in his head from the beating he took near Lizard Mine made it difficult to stay awake. The cold water helped a little with that part, but other than that, there was nothing that could be done. He didn't have the strength to swim to the shoreline while the current was spinning him around, and in order to use his magic to heal himself, a large amount of concentration was needed. So there he remained, struggling to keep his head above water as the river carried him along the bottom of the mountains until it suddenly took a sharp turn to the left. The river was a bit shallower now, so that his tiptoes barely touched the bottom if he stretched, but the current speed increased, as did the amount of rocks that were sticking out on the surface. Making an effort to grab one of them, his hand kept slipping off, allowing him to be bashed into what seemed like every single one along the way. Hitting his head a couple of times, and his body feeling the rest of the river's wrath, Aghanim was happy that he had cast the shielding spell on his robe, since he would probably be dead now if he had not. Of course, he still felt all of the rocks, but then the water suddenly became a lot deeper the next time he was pushed down. Fighting to get back to the surface, the robed wizard braced himself for more rocks, but there were none to be found. That, and the current of the water had drastically slowed down. Taking extra effort to rub his eyes, he realized that he was no longer in a river at all, but a massive body of water that barely had any kind of current aside from its own waves. There was an island a good distance away that was connected to the mainland by a bridge, and farther south, at the very edge of his vision, there was another island with a far grander structure in the center. Lake Hylia, he thought to himself, as the momentum from the river pushed him along slowly. This must be Lake Hylia, meaning that the first island was Eagle Prison, and that the other island would be Snake Palace, where the provincial governor lived. Maybe if he used all of his remaining strength, he could make it to either the prison island or the shore, but then all plans were halted as the water suddenly exploded in front of him. At first he thought Ganondorf had found him again, but then he realized that it wasn't something hitting the water, but rather something coming out of it. It looked sort of like a huge blue fish with red fins on its head and arms as it leapt out of the water, but there was no more time for speculating when it dove back down and its clawed hands stabbed into Aghanim's shoulders as it took him down into the depths along with it. The light from the surface became more distant as the creature pulled him further and further down, and this time there was no escape as he slowly lost consciousness. Meanwhile, in Port Hylia, having slept for most of the morning, Miranda was a bit disappointed when she sat up and saw that it was still raining outside her window. She also regretted sleeping for as long as she had since Zelda was counting on her, but she also needed to keep her efforts, as well as her identity as Blind the Master Thief, a secret. This meant regularly showing her face around the city and especially spending time with her father, so she made sure that her blind costume as well as the recovered chest were hidden within her luggage, and then she got ready for the day. Changing out of her nightgown, she put on a simple brown traveling dress in its place, since the rain would ruin her fancier clothes. Then she put the magic bracelet and compass on one wrist, mounted her hookshot on the other, and put up her hair, using the skeleton key as a hairpin. Once she was finished, she left her room and went downstairs to the lobby of the inn, where they were staying, to find her father. He was there all right, but he was certainly not alone. There was a very large and powerful-looking man sitting across from him at the table, a man with green skin and red hair, who turned and smiled at her when her father spoke.
Ganondorf,
she whispered to herself, suddenly not feeling very brave. Hoping to somehow be able to avoid this situation, this became impossible when her father waved her over to them, and of course she had to go. Zelda had warned her in the letter that Ganondorf had everyone fooled, especially the king, meaning that no one else had any idea how dangerous he was, or the slightest idea that he was the one behind Princess Zelda's disappearance. Miranda had only met him once before, and according to her cousin, he was a violent brute who was capable of anything, meaning that if she revealed his true nature, both she and her father could be in danger. "Ah, good morning, my dear," her father said as she gave him a kiss on the cheek and sat down. "Miranda, this is Ganondorf, the newly appointed general of the Southlands. Ganondorf, do you remember my daughter Miranda?" "How could I forget?" the sorcerer replied as he took her hand and kissed it. "You are truly a vision, Miranda."
Thank you,"
she replied uncomfortably while slowly taking her hand back.
What, brings you to Port Hylia?
"I hate to start off your day with bad news, my dear," her father continued, "but your cousin Zelda has vanished and your uncle has charged Ganondorf with discovering her location. It is suspected, and I do not wish to alarm you, that she might have been kidnapped." "It is a fact, Lord Rule," Ganondorf added. And I may have discovered a clue, but it is locked inside a chest that can only be opened by a blood member of the royal family. A female blood member. Now, you and your brother, King Harkinian, do not meet these requirements, but Miranda does, being that her and Princess Zelda's mothers were sisters. I hate to impose like this, but I must ask your daughter to accompany me for a short time, only until we have discovered the contents of the chest. This request of his made Miranda's mouth run dry, and as far as her father knew, Ganondorf was the king's trusted friend, and given that the safety of his niece was at stake, there was no reason for him to object. And if Miranda objected, it might alert the sorcerer that she was aware of the truth. This would put all of them in danger, as well as increase the possibility that he would discover that another chest was in the room above where the three of them were sitting. All she could do in this situation was reluctantly agree, and hopefully, she would be able to get herself out of whatever Ganondorf had planned for her.